Good afternoon. This is a Q&A with the Office of Business Diversity. I am Trifina Ramsey, the Director of the Office of Business Diversity. And alongside me is Alice Robeson, our Assistant Director. This session will focus on the responses received from past surveys conducted from previous GovBy events. The format is designed to address the questions posed and provide a response. Please note, all responses contained herein will be from the perspective of the New York State Office of Business Diversity.
To introduce the session, we wanted to go over some factors relative to goal setting. And before I say any more, let me introduce myself. I forgot. Alice Roberson, Assistant Director with the Office of Business Diversity. So in reference to goal setting, we first start out with the purchase decision process. And that relies on order of precedence according to the New York State purchasing requirements. So the purchasing requirements say that we have to either procure through preferred source if the commodity and or service is available through those items, or the OGS centralized contract if the item or service is available through that process before we can go to the open market. The difference between the agency-specific goal and the contract goal. An agency-specific goal is the product of the numerator of the total, which is total spend allocated for MWBE subcontracting opportunity, and the denominator, which is the total contract spend anticipated. This percentage is determined to be the agency's anticipated goal. A contract goal is the product of the numerator, which is the total value of scopes that can be allocated to the MWBE for subcontracting purposes, and the denominator, which is the total contract value. This percentage is the contract goal. Goals are determined prior to the advertisement of a solicitation. So, for instance, does the solicitation to be awarded meet the dollar threshold for goal assessment? If yes, are there subcontracting opportunities? If there are subcontracting opportunities, then we would vet the MWBE directory, which can be found on the ESD website. Goals are reevaluated at contract extension or modification. So we took the questions that we had received from previous sessions, and we'll go through those now, which may address some questions that you currently have. For instance, what budget lines are required or subject to MWBE goal assessment? Empire State Development would have to answer that question specifically. However, from the perspective of OGS's OBD office, it would be any subcontractable scope or task, excluding all allowable exemptions and proprietary lines. And you will note that every question hereafter will be addressed from the Office of General Services, OBD, Office of Business Diversity's perspective. How can I determine whether an OGS procurement has MWBE goals? MWBE goals can be found on the contract award page, also known as the landing page on the OGS Procurement Services website, or in the how to use documents for that contract award. Does the total goal have to be equally attained? 15% MBE or 15% and 15% WBE? The answer to that question is, per OGS's standard contract language, the total contract goal can be obtained by utilizing any combination of MBE and or WBE participation for subcontracting and supplies acquired under the contract. Can MWBE or SDVOB be set aside as a mandatory pass or fail option for the evaluation criteria? No. If the contract has MWBE and SDVOB goals, the RFQ must reflect the goal requirements. The contractors have approved MWBE and SDVOB utilization plans to meet the goals of the contract. Further, authorized users are not required to have the contractors submit the utilization plans for each RFQ. How are goals allocated for certified prime contractors? An MBE contractor must still meet the WBE requirement and vice versa. A dual certified MWBE participation in a state contract may be counted towards either an MBE or a WBE goal, but may not be counted towards both. The chosen designation, either M or W, must remain for the life of the contract. Do authorized users of state centralized contracts still receive MWBE credit if a listed subcontractor has lost their New York State MWBE certification? The short answer is yes. The MWBE credit is applicable for the life of that contract. Is there a difference between utilizing a broker or reseller for MWBE utilization credit? Yes. The credit for utilization is as follows: broker 25%, reseller 100%. How do we identify MWBE vendors to subcontract? First, it starts with the scope of services or products. Once the contractor has identified the areas of work you need the MWBE to provide or do, then you would search the directory. Secondly, if you are looking to utilize an MWBE identified on a centralized contract, you must review the How to Use memo to determine if you must vet the entire list of participating subcontractors, or if you just need to solicit a quote from 3 or more. How is discretionary purchasing from MWBEs handled as it relates to goal setting? The discretionary buying thresholds for commodities, services, and technology not available from preferred sources or from the OGS centralized contract are as follows. The threshold is $50,000 for state agency, $50,000 for state agencies, $85,000 for OGS agency specific contracts, and $125,000 for SUNY. How is discretionary purchasing from MWBs handled as it relates to goal setting? This continuation from the previous question. In addition to the threshold of $200,000 for purchases from a New York State small business, a firm certified as a minority and or women-owned business enterprise, we review the request for purchase or service to determine if there are subcontracting opportunities. So once we receive the request, we review it to determine if there are subcontracting opportunities. Then we search the directory for MWBEs who can either provide this commodity or perform this service. If subcontracting opportunities are identified, we search the directory to identify MWBE subcontractors or suppliers with either the skill or the product. Then we contact the MWBEs directly to inquire if they can provide the requested product or service according to the scope of work provided. We then provide this list to the contract manager of all MWBEs and their responses for consideration for solicitation. Once the solicitation is posted, our office, the Office of Business Diversity, then sends an outreach email from the New York State contract system notifying MWBEs and SDVOBs of the opportunity. Many individuals ask us, how can I find MWBEs? First, you must go to the New York State contract system. The link is provided herein. Then you would click on the New York State Directory of Certified Firms, which is slightly in the middle of the page. Once you click the search directory, you will be brought to this dialog box. By default, both certifications are checked for MWBE and from MBE and WBE, excuse me. What you would then do is scroll down to the section for search by commodity code. When you click on that, this box will come up here, which is a search box. You can select from a CSI, a NAICS, an NIGP, or a NICE.dot listing, codes, commodity codes. You would select the appropriate designation. Then you would select the work district. For argument's sake, we selected the capital region. So for example, just to note, we selected electrical in the search. We typed in electrical in the search bar for the NAICS dropdown. We selected NAICS, and then we selected the NAICS code called Electrical Contractors and Other Wiring Installation. That's NAICS 238210 for electrical contractors. This particular one is, if you look at it, when you open up the screen, if you try this as an example, you will note that it's bold, which means it'll capture just about everyone that's in the directory that has this particular code and is identified as an electrical contractor. Once we have received or selected our electrician or electrical NAICS code, selected our work region, capital region, and we know that we've selected for both M and W, we click search, and we note that there are 5 firms that have been identified with 5 certifications with the code that we selected. So you'll see them here. You can also download your search results so that you may be able to get additional information on those MWBE firms. The next question we've received is, can we utilize MWBE vendors that are not listed in the New York State ESD certified list? For example, if they're certified in another state or by another agency. Yes, but, and we strongly state this, you will not receive credit towards the utilization of the vendor unless they are certified by New York State and listed in the Empire State or ESD directory as a New York State certified MWBE vendor. What is good faith effort? According to the New York Codes and Regulations 142.8, the New York Codes and Regulations number 5, 142.8, the contractor's good faith efforts is defined as the contractor having to document good faith efforts towards meeting certified minority and women-owned business enterprises utilization plans. So how do you show it? How do you show good faith effort? We get this question a lot. The following are some examples of information that can be submitted to show good faith efforts made to utilize MWBEs. For instance, were they posted in, did you post or list a general circulation or trade for MWBE oriented publications? the dates of those publications when you sent the notices out for those certified MWBEs as subcontractors or suppliers, copies of the solicitation, if you sent solicitations out to those individuals, a list of the certified MWBEs appearing in the Empire State Development that were solicited for the contract. As you saw earlier, we showed you a list of MWBEs who we searched for electrician. We also shared with you earlier that we also call them individually to find out if they're capable of performing the task. So you provide dates and copies of solicitations and copies of responses by those certified MWBEs. Email them, call them, make notes of the conversation, describe the specific reasons that responding certified MWBEs were not selected. Maybe they said they were too busy. So you make a note of that and you make the date of the conversation as well as the contact person. Third, you get descriptions of the contract documents, the plan specifications. All those were made available to MWBEs by you when soliciting their participation. What did you send them? Did they receive it? Putting a return receipt on your email to show that you had sent the information to them. The steps taken to structure the scope of work for the purpose of subcontracting. How was the solicitation drafted? Was there a subcontracting opportunity that could have been identified for either subcontracting or for supplies from a certified MWBE? Number 4, a description of the negotiations between you and certified MWBEs for the purposes of complying with MWBE goals of the contract. Maybe the MWBE has sent you a quote for the work that they can do. Maybe you sent a response back as the decision maker within your agency that says that's not something, that's not the, that is not a competitive cost. They go back to the drawing board and they come up with another quote. Or number 5, dates of any pre-bid or pre-award meetings scheduled by OGS with certified MWBEs. Taking a list of those MWBEs who attended the pre-bid and pre-awards so that you have that as documentation. And any other information deemed relevant by request. Many services, and this question was posed to us, that many services do not have subcontracting opportunities, but we force the vendors to look. Some have backed out of bidding on New York State contracts due to stricter requirements. Is it best to request a waiver prior to contract release? It is a myth that bidders are not bidding on New York State contracts because of the MWBE goals. Potential bidders who back out of a New York State contract may do so for a myriad of reasons. The MWBE requirement is not always the reason. The second part of that question is a waiver request can be submitted at any point in time of the contract. Once submitted, it will be reviewed to determine if the standard of good faith efforts, as just previously discussed, has been met. Can ESD release a checklist of what the requirements for a waiver are? A checklist for the requirements for a waiver is defined in the items listed under the definition of a good faith effort, or GFE. Those can be found on slides 30 to 33. So once the slide presentation is shared with you, you may go back to slides 30 to 33 and use those items or those number listings to as a checklist to see whether or not you have provided what you believe or deem as documentation of good faith effort. This does conclude our brief presentation on previous requests submitted by GovBuy participants who had specific questions regarding searching the directory and GoSeg. We want to thank you for your participation. We will now open the session for any questions you may have.
Thank you, Trifina and Alice. This is Sandra here from OGS Procurement Services. We do have 2 questions that have come up in the chat box. The first one being, what is the dollar threshold for goal assessment?
So the dollar threshold for goal assessment for commodities or services is $25,000. For construction, it's $100,000.
Thank you. The second question is, why do some contracts not have MWBE goals?
This can be several reasons why they don't have MWBE goals. The first is, were there MWBEs available to perform the required scope of services or supply what is being asked? Next, were they interested in the opportunity? The other is, depending on the type of contract it is it a statewide contract where there are only MWBEs limited in one area versus the availability to meet the needs of the contract on a statewide level? So there are several factors that determine whether or not a goal can be set on that contract. The dollar threshold just starts our initial review to determine if there are subcontracting or supplier opportunities. The next is based on firms actually available and certified to provide those services.
Thank you. We have a third question in the form of a scenario. So if credit can be continued after a vendor loses certification or does not recertify, what is the incentive for them to recertify or reapply? Some contracts extend 5 to 7 years. Also, if the terms of the contract allow a continuance after contract end date and the vendor has not recertified, will they still earn credit?
So a contractor can receive credit for any approved MWBE for the life cycle of that contract. If that contract is up for renewal or reevaluation, those subcontractors and suppliers will be reevaluated at that time because there's a change in the contract. So therefore, during the life cycle, if there is an amendment or any adjustment, then those subs and suppliers will be reviewed for that. But the initial utilization plan submission does satisfy the requirement and credit will still be applicable. This is done to not penalize the contractor who did in fact exhibit a good faith effort to utilize MWBEs.
Thank you. We do have a next question. If an MBE or a WBE is identified as a prime contractor, then participation is considered to be 100%, correct?
It all depends. If there's a subcontracting opportunity in that MWBE, there was a MWBE, MBE and a WBE goal, and that prime is the MBE, he still have to show good faith efforts to utilize a WBE. So he would have to request a waiver and state that I'm a certified firm and I will be meeting the needs of that contract in its entirety by the use of myself and no other subcontractor. So at that stage, a review has to be done by the MWBE office reviewing that contract and that utilization plan.
Thank you. I do not see any other questions in the chat box related to the topic right now. Okay, we do have a new question come in. Did you say you have to assess for goals at 25,000 K? I thought up to 50K was a T contract and therefore discretionary, and you didn't have to assess for goals until after 50K.
Now, if it's a commodity or service contract, the threshold for review for goals is $25,000. If it's a construction, it's $100,000. If you're speaking about, since you're speaking about discretionary, that is a total different, that's a total different animal. So discretionary is set aside. So that means the discretionary can be with an MBE, a WBE, or a small business. And that, in that regard, there wouldn't be a separate goal set on it because the opportunity is in place for those specific entities.
The next question. Did you say MWBEs are only used when a commodity cannot be procured through preferred source or centralized contracts?
Could you read that question again? I'm sorry.
Sure. Did you say MWBEs are only used when a commodity cannot be procured through preferred source or centralized contracts?
So MWBE can be used at any time. However, the review and the order of precedence is first, if folks are looking to purchase supplies and materials, they should first go through the preferred source. If it's available through a preferred source, that's who they should use first. So we're talking about different things here. If it's discretionary, it goes, you start off with the preferred source, then it's the agency specific, then it is whether or not, you know, then we go to open market. So at the end of the day, the threshold is still those specific thresholds, 25,000 and 100,000.
Okay, we do have another question. Just to be clear, the aggregate MWBE goals are typically up to 30%. Therefore, an MBE or a WBE performing as a prime would be 100%, which far exceeds the aggregate goals. Why then would any MWBE seek out to sub in order to achieve additional goals?
So it's not a matter of achieving additional goal. It's about sharing the wealth, because this is what we're here to do in these programs. So a lot of times prime contractors, they sub out the work anyhow. So in this regard, if you're bidding that contract, you're bidding that contract as the prime. You're servicing as the prime. The goal is a subcontractor and supplier opportunity, not a prime. So therefore, goals apply for subcontracting. Now, if you are, in fact, a prime that is certified, again, you have to state to us that you're going to meet the needs of that contract 100%, and you're not subbing out to any other firm.
The next question. Does the goal setting threshold of 25K apply to standalone purchase orders as well as contracts?
So any state spending with state funds of $25,000 or more, MWBE goals have to be considered.
There are no questions in the chat box at this moment.
All right, we'll hang on here for just another minute or two to see if any additional questions come in. But just as a reminder, we will be taking the recording from today's session as well as the slides and posting them on the OGS website in the near future. And then we'll send out an email that has a link to that webpage, as well as a link to a survey regarding today's session. All right, I'm not seeing any additional questions come in. Alice or Trifina, is there anything you wanted to say in conclusion before we wrap up?
Sure. If there are any questions after this presentation, You can send an email to our office at mwbe@ogs.ny.gov, and we will answer any questions that you have as best we can.